Since 1989, Gloria Weidner has been mourning the loss of her teenage daughter Amy, who was brutally murdered in her bedroom.
I thought, they're going to see we're a good family and they'll figure this out.
At home that day was Amy's little girl, 2-year-old Emily. Miraculously, she was unharmed.
You have 24 years of always wondering why this happened. Why did they not find anyone? Is he still out there?
The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
For 24 years, Gloria Weidner woke up in the same house, walked past the same staircase, and asked herself the same question. Who did this? On the morning of November 13th, 1989, a 2-year-old girl stood alone at the bottom of a staircase in Indianapolis, not crying, not calling out, just standing the way a toddler stands when something has happened that she doesn't yet have words for. Her name was Emily. Upstairs, behind a closed bedroom door, was her mother. Amy Weidner was 16 years old. She would never get older than that. Welcome to the Black Docket. Today we're covering the murder of Amy Weidner, a case that sat unsolved for 22 years. Not because there were no leads, but because one name was written down in a police file in 2003 and nobody ever picked up the phone. If you want cases like this one properly remembered, subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. Amy Weidner was born in 1973 on the south side of Indianapolis, the second of 4 children. Her mother, Gloria, was raising all of them alone after a divorce, working full-time with no second income and no safety net. Amy filled in the gaps without being asked. She cooked dinner, she managed her younger siblings, she ran the household in the hours her mother couldn't be there. Her brother JP was a year older. Her sister Tanya was a year younger. The youngest, Cassie, was only 12 when everything changed. At Howe High School, Amy was the kind of student teachers remembered afterward for reasons that had nothing to do with grades. She was in French club and math club. She played clarinet in the band and cheered for the wrestling team. Her French teacher, Jody George, would later say the thing that stood out most about Amy wasn't her performance in class. It was her work ethic, the way she showed up, the way she never waited to be asked twice. In 1987, when Amy was 13 years old, she became pregnant. For nearly 5.5 months, she told no one, not her mother, not her teachers, not her closest friends. She wore baggy sweatshirts to school every day, and nobody noticed anything was different. The father was 17-year-old Tony Abercrombie, one of JP's close friends, someone who had been in and out of the Weidner house for years. Amy had been seeing him in secret. When Gloria eventually found out, both about the pregnancy and about who was responsible, she made it clear she wanted Abercrombie to have nothing to do with her daughter or her granddaughter going forward. On October 25, 1987, Amy gave birth to a daughter. They named her Emily. 6 days later, Amy was back at school. Not weeks later, not a month later, 6 days. She caught up on everything she'd missed and kept going. Her grades didn't drop after Emily was born. They went up. She made honor roll and started talking seriously about college. Her mother thought she'd make a good teacher one day. That Halloween, Amy dressed as the Jolly Green Giant and put baby Emily in a matching Sprout costume. A 16-year-old mother and her toddler at a Halloween party, having the kind of ordinary night nobody thinks to remember until there's a reason to. Nobody in that house had any idea that November 13th, 1989, a Monday, would be the last completely normal morning they would ever have. Gloria left for work the way she always did. 4 kids, 1 income, nobody at home to hand things off to. She was good at this by then. She'd been doing it alone for years. Before she left, she checked on Amy, who'd woken up with a sore throat, and asked if she wanted Emily dropped at the babysitter's for the day. Amy told her no, she'd keep Emily home with her. Gloria got to work and sat down at her desk like any other day. Around 9:30, she called home to check in. No answer. She called again a few minutes later. Still nothing. She asked a neighbor to walk over and knock on the door, and when that neighbor called her back, Gloria said the tone of her voice told her everything before a single word was spoken. She got in her car and drove home. The house was quiet in a way that had no innocent explanation. On the landing at the bottom of the stairs was Emily, 2 years old, not crying, just standing there, looking up at her grandmother with an expression that had already taken in something she would never be able to describe. Gloria picked her up, got her somewhere safe, and went upstairs to Amy's bedroom door. The silence behind it, she said afterward, was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Captain Jack Gilker, one of the first officers through the door that morning, would say years later that it was a scene he never forgot. There was blood on the walls. A violent struggle had clearly taken place, and Amy had fought, hard, and for a long time. Investigators counted 29 separate injuries. She had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled. She bled to death alone, in her own bedroom, one floor above her 2-year-old daughter. And pressed into the wall, in Amy's own blood, was a full, clean palm print. Not a smudge, a complete print. Whoever did this had touched the wall on his way out and left behind the one piece of evidence that would eventually end him. Police cut that section of drywall out of the wall entirely and preserved it. It would sit in an evidence room for the next 22 years. There's one detail from that morning that matters more than almost anything else in this case. The person who did this was alone in that house with a 2-year-old girl. He heard her, he very likely saw her, and he made the decision to leave her alive. Nobody has ever fully explained why. A few days after the murder, a detective sat down across from Emily with a set of finger puppets, not asking her direct questions, just watching what she did with them. Without being prompted, the 2-year-old acted out a little girl running back and forth, from her own room, to her mother's room, to her grandmother's room. When Gloria later asked Emily what had happened to her mom, Emily had only one phrase for it: Amy was mean. She didn't mean cruel. In her limited vocabulary, it was the only way she had to describe her mother fighting for her life. The physical evidence built a theory fast. The back door had been left unlocked. A graphic equalizer, belonging to JP, was missing from his room. Cash Amy had been collecting from a school fundraiser, selling chocolate for band uniforms, was gone from the kitchen. This wasn't random. Whoever came into that house that Monday morning knew exactly where to go and roughly how much time he had. He had been inside that home before. Police worked through the obvious names first. Tony Abercrombie, Emily's father, had motive on paper, given the family's history with him, but his alibi held up under multiple witnesses, and he was cleared. JP was questioned and cleared. Then came Troy Jackson, who lived in the house directly behind the Weidners and knew specifically about the missing equalizer. He'd left work for almost an hour on the day of the murder and come back out of breath. He started volunteering details about blood on the walls that had never been made public. Every instinct in the room said this was their man, but his hands showed no bruising. His hair samples didn't match anything from the scene. He took a polygraph and passed. The thread snapped, and the investigation stalled. At Amy's funeral, detectives stood at the back of the room, not to grieve, but to work. They studied faces and collected names. One of the things they took from that day was the funeral home's guest book, a list of everyone who had signed their name to say they'd come to pay respects. Whoever killed Amy may well have been in that room. He may have cried. He may have told the family he was sorry. And whatever he wrote in that book went into a file, into a box, and didn't come back out for 22 years. Gloria went home to the same house, the same stairs, the same bedroom door. She started locking the back door every night. Cassie, 12 years old, called her father and asked him to nail the windows shut. Gloria would find herself standing in a grocery store, looking at the faces of strangers, thinking, he's local, he knew this family, he could be right here, he was never far. Years passed. Detectives rotated through the case the way they do with any cold case. Assigned, worked for a while, reassigned. In 2002, Lieutenant Roger Spurgeon took over the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's cold case unit, inheriting roughly 800 unsolved cases. Amy Weidner's file was one folder among 800. At one point, a man called the department's tip line, claiming Amy had been appearing to him in his dreams. He'd lived across the street from the family and admitted he'd had feelings for her. He'd also been sent home from school early on the morning of the murder, with no alibi to speak of. His DNA was tested against evidence preserved from Amy's bedding. It didn't match. Then, in 2003, something happened that's difficult to sit with in hindsight. As part of the reinvestigation, Spurgeon's team re-interviewed Tony Abercrombie, who gave them a list of people who used to spend time at the Weidner house. People who knew the family, the routines, the layout. One of the names on that list was Rodney Denk, a friend of JP's who'd been a regular presence in that home. The name went into the file. Spurgeon would later say, honestly, that Denk was simply one of dozens of names he never had the chance to run down. One person, working 800 cases. But here's what's true regardless of the reasons. In 2003, 9 years before this case was finally solved, the name of Amy's killer was sitting in a police file, written down in plain sight, available to anyone who read far enough into it. Nobody did. The file went back in the box. Time kept moving. Emily grew up, graduated high school, and enrolled at Purdue University, carrying her mother's work ethic forward in a way that felt inherited rather than learned. Gloria kept waking up in the same house, and Rodney Denk kept going to work like anyone else, 5 minutes away, on the same streets Amy used to walk. In 2011, a local newspaper ran a piece on Indianapolis's unsolved murders that included Amy's name. A friend of Amy's read it and built a Facebook memorial page for her, old photos, memories, messages from people who'd known her. The detective currently assigned to the cold case wanted a copy of that page for the file. He didn't know how to print directly from Facebook, so he walked down the hall and asked for help. Detective Sergeant William Carter had spent 14 years in the department's nuisance abatement unit, the division that handled overcrowded clubs, underage drinking complaints, and noise violations. He'd become the office's go-to person for anything involving the internet, mostly because he used Facebook to track down illegally promoted parties. He had never worked a homicide. He had zero official connection to Amy Weidner's case. His entire assignment that afternoon was to print out a Facebook page. He printed it and then looked at the photo at the top. Amy at 16, holding baby Emily, smiling the way someone smiles when they think they've figured out exactly what their life is supposed to look like. Carter had grown up near that neighborhood. Amy would have been roughly his own age. For reasons nobody asked him to explain and no supervisor assigned, he picked up the 65-page case file and took it home. He read all of it, cover to cover, typewritten pages from 1989, evidence logs, decades-old suspect interviews, including Abercrombie's 2003 statement with its list of names. And the first problem he found was structural. The entire original 1989 investigation existed only on paper. Nothing was searchable. Nothing was cross-referenced. Carter started entering it all into a database by hand. Every name, every address, every neighbor who'd been canvassed on the morning of the murder. What became obvious almost immediately was that dozens of JP's friends who had regularly been in that house had never been formally interviewed, never given a DNA sample, never officially cleared. Not because anyone suspected them specifically, simply because in 22 years, nobody had gotten around to it. Carter started making calls. One went to Joy Haney, who'd lived directly across the street from the Weidners in 1989 and had since moved away. He tracked her down through the original canvassing records. She gave him a handful of names, most of which were already in the file, already cleared. Then she mentioned one more, Rodney Denk. Not as a suspect, just as someone who used to come around, a friend of JP's worth talking to. Carter wrote the name down, and something clicked, because that name was already sitting in the file, inside Tony Abercrombie's 2003 statement. Mentioned once, never followed up on, never cleared. Two separate sources, 9 years apart, pointing at the same name, and neither lead had ever been chased down. Carter ran Denk through the system. 40 years old, divorced, one son, living with his mother on the east side of Indianapolis, working at a local auto shop. No outstanding warrants, nothing that stood out. Carter drove to the house. Denk wasn't home, so he left his card with Denk's mother and a message about routine questions on an old case. Denk called back that same day, calm, cooperative, willing to sit down and talk. They set a date. When Carter showed up for that appointment, Rodney Denk was gone. Not just out for the afternoon, gone. According to his mother, she hadn't seen him in days. Separately, Denk had missed several days of work, and a missing persons report had reportedly been filed on his behalf. A man who'd agreed without hesitation to talk to police had vanished the moment the appointment got close. Carter pulled Denk's arrest history and found 2 entries. a battery charge from 1991, and a larceny charge from 1997, both of which had produced fingerprints already on file. Carter's stated goal at that point wasn't to build a case. It was simply to rule Denk out and cross one more name off a long list. He sent the 1997 prints over to the department's latent print unit for comparison, and went back to his desk. Later that same day, forensics called back. The palm print lifted from Amy Weidner's bedroom wall in 1989, the one cut out of the drywall and kept in storage for 22 years, matched Rodney Denk's 1997 arrest print. No ambiguity, an exact match. 22 years, multiple detectives, an entire cold case unit, a name that had been sitting in a 2003 interview for 9 years, unread past the point where it mattered. And it took one nuisance abatement officer, working this on his own time, roughly 2 weeks to find what everyone before him had walked past. Carter called Gloria and told her they'd identified a suspect connected to the family, without giving a name. Her first reaction wasn't relief, it was fear. She asked one question: is it someone we know? The silence on the other end of the line answered it for her. Using a rental car equipped with OnStar tracking that Denk had used his credit card to book, investigators located him on the east side of Indianapolis, stepping out of a friend's house. He hadn't fled the city, he'd barely gone anywhere. When he saw officers approaching, the first words out of his mouth were, "I didn't do it." Then he pulled out a knife and cut his own wrist before anyone could stop him. He was taken to Wishart Hospital, and, once stabilized, questioning began. Over the next 2 days, Denk talked. He admitted he'd been in the house to steal the equalizer, that the plan had been a straightforward burglary on a morning he expected the house to be empty. He said he hadn't known Amy was home, and that she confronted him after coming around the corner while he was in JP's room. From there, according to investigators, his account shifted several times, including references to a possible second person involved, though the details of that account changed enough between tellings that police were never able to substantiate it. His DNA was later matched to evidence preserved from Amy's bedding since 1989. JP, Amy's brother, the same friend whose room Denk had been robbing when Amy walked in, later said something that gets at the center of this whole case. Oh gaze, Denk had stood with the family at Amy's funeral days after killing her, and none of them had known. In June of 2013, Rodney Denk pleaded guilty to the rape and murder of Amy Weidner and was sentenced to 65 years in prison. He will not be eligible for release until he is in his 70s. Gloria had spent weeks bracing herself for rage, for the moment she'd finally be in the same room as the man who took her daughter. When Denk was brought into the courtroom, what she felt instead was something closer to recognition. Outside the courthouse afterward, she put it simply, she'd expected to see a monster, but who she saw was Rodney. That's the entire case in a single sentence. He wasn't a stranger who appeared from nowhere and vanished back into it. He was familiar. He was the kind of person you let into your house without a second thought, because you already knew him, and that familiarity is exactly what made Amy vulnerable. Not a stranger, not even the unlocked door, the trust that had been handed to someone who had no right to it. Emily Weidner graduated from Purdue with honors. Her mother's work ethic carried forward in a way that felt almost inherited. The year after graduation, she moved to California, saying later that she didn't feel she could become who she wanted to be while still living inside that history. At her graduation, Jody George, who had taught French to both Amy and Emily, a generation apart, pulled Emily aside and told her she knew her mother would have been proud. Back in Indianapolis, Gloria eventually redid Amy's old bedroom. It's where her grandchildren sleep now when they visit. Almost nothing from Amy's time in that room remains, except a single hat still hanging on the door. Bill Carter, the officer who was only ever supposed to print a Facebook page, still maintains Amy's memorial page to this day. Nobody assigned him that either. He decided, on his own, that this case deserved someone to keep caring about it. And because of that one decision, a family finally got an answer they'd been waiting 22 years to hear. In an odd and unrelated footnote that came out during the investigation into Denk's background, his own son, Dylan Denk, was separately convicted of killing his mother, Rodney's ex-wife, in 2009, at almost exactly the age Rodney had been when he killed Amy. Investigators called it, simply, a strange coincidence. It doesn't explain anything. It just sits there, uncomfortably, next to everything else this case already asks you to hold. If you think Rodney Denk is telling the full truth about acting alone, or if you think there's still a piece of this that was never nailed down, say so in the comments. We read all of them. And if this is the kind of case you want more of, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.